Okay, Bonhoeffer, to me personally, has to be like one of the most well-known people in Christian history that I know the least about. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's weird how little I know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I don't know why this is. I've never read a book on him. I've never read a book that he's written.
Yeah.
I hear his name a lot. It seems like he has a lot to offer. Why is he? Can you tell us a little bit about him and why in particular did his thinking or his writing stick so well?
So words and actions, right? Words and actions. He lived what he talked about, what he wrote about. So he was.
Do you think that's primarily why his teachings have stuck? So
he lived it, just like Martin Luther King Jr. in a different way. So both Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Martin Luther King Jr. died in the month of April of their 39th year. These were obviously in different years. For Bonhoeffer, it was 1945. For Martin Luther King Jr., it was 1968.
Really? But both were April of their
39th year. They both held PhDs in theology. They were both pastors. They both wrote and they both led social movements against evil, just in different ways. So,
how old are you?
38.
Me too. Next April. Except I have no PhD. Well, you have the PhD.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
All right. I'll make sure I get to know your boys.
Yeah. I certainly hope not. So Martin Luther King, we're more educated about him in general because he was an American, and so the civil rights movement and the communities that he led were explicitly following Jesus. But Dietrich Bonhoeffer was doing something a little different because in Nazi Germany, you couldn't march on the streets against Hitler. They would just kill you. So there was at least some restraint in the United States that was not present in Nazi Germany. So a lot of stuff had to happen underground.
There was restraint in Nazi Germany that wasn't present in America, right?
No, restraint of like, they might unleash the dogs at you or fire hose you.
Got it. Restraint on the other side.
But the government is probably not going to just mass murder you.
Yeah.
So not great, but a little different than Nazi Germany. If you're like down with Hitler, it's like no one sees you ever again. And that's just how that goes. So Bonhoeffer's kind of movement against social evil had to be more underground. So he ran like an illegal underground seminary because a big question in the German church is, are we going to sign this thing called the Aryan paragraph, which was basically like if you're not full-blooded Aryan, whatever that means, if you have any Jewish ancestry, you can't be part of the church leadership, you can't be a pastor. So it was basically racial segregation laws, but through the mechanism of the church. And there were a lot of people who were really uncomfortable because the German church, German Lutheran church, the Protestant church in Germany was much like what the Church of England is still to this day, where it's like you're being paid by the government. Like it is a state church. Like if the government doesn't like you, you don't make money. Like you get kicked out. And so this is like a career, there are pluses and minuses to this. But if you resisted the Nazis as a pastor in Germany in 1941, like you're done. Like you're getting sent to the front lines. like this happened to some of Bonhoeffer's students. So I can't tell you the whole story, but he gets affected as a young man growing up by his brother dying in World War I, going to Rome and seeing Catholicism as an 18-year-old, deciding to study theology, eventually becoming a pastor, reading some of the stuff that Karl Barth wrote against the super, super liberal German theologians at the time who were kind of collapsing Christianity into humanity. This is a very Reader's Digest version. He ends up going to New York, Bonhoeffer does, as a young man in 1930, around there. And white Christianity to him is like kind of this weak, mamby-pamby self-help. But then he encounters black Christianity in Harlem, New York. And he's like, this is Christianity. And
really?
And this is where he has his encounter with Jesus. So he would say, I was a theologian and I was a pastor, but I wasn't a Christian, and now I am.
Really?
Yeah. So
how old is he at this point?
So he was born, at 45. He was born in 1906, so this is 24. And he already has a PhD, by the way. He already has a PhD, and he's published a couple of academic things. But yeah, he has this, just like John Wesley was a pastor, and then he has this experience where he felt strangely warmed. That was his kind of him and Jesus moment. In a very similar way, Bonhoeffer has sometime in the 1930 corridor there. and I believe, and other scholars believe, it was because of Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. So here's this German dude who speaks English, but probably with a heavy accent, teaching like young African American kids Sunday school, like in
In
Harlem.
New York?
Yeah, in New York. Like getting involved in the choir and stuff.
For how long?
Just for a year. He was
Okay.
he was there for because he was on like a student visiting kind of program fellowship visa thing at Union Theological Seminary in New York. So it changes his life, and he comes back to Berlin and he starts lecturing at the University of Berlin, which is a very dry theological and he starts asking people bizarre questions like, do you love Jesus? That was not a question you asked at the University of Berlin in a theology class. That's besides the point. It doesn't matter whether or not I love Jesus. He's bringing this is the term, Negro spirituals. He's bringing early black roots gospel music and playing it on like gramophones for his students who are like, what is this? They're used to this very middle class, polished German version of Jesus, and they're getting this downtrodden black African-American Jesus.
He's playing Negro spirituals back in Germany.
Yeah.
After he returned back there.
Yeah, he brought them with him. He bought records and brought them.
Wow.
Yeah, he's blowing people's minds.
Wow, he's blowing my mind.
Yeah, and they're like, what is this? And so he's challenging his students to throw off their kind of like European, stodgy, middle class kind of suit wearing Jesus, and challenging their kind of conceptions and saying, this is a whole nother deal. Like this black Christianity in New York, like changed him. And so there's a whole book about this called Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus, written by a friend of mine, Reggie Williams. Brilliant book, really well done. And it's an academic book, but it's pretty readable. And he goes through all the black theology that was coming out of the United States, out of like segregation, slavery, all that stuff, and how that impacted the church and the pastor that Bonhoeffer was kind of sitting under his teaching. And so how it was super revolutionary theologically for Bonhoeffer to meet a Jesus who was like poor. Like people didn't talk about Jesus as like being poor, or cast aside or margin, just that wasn't kind of in the zeitgeist at the time. That wasn't like popular. So anyway, all that, he comes back to Germany. He waffles a bit of like, what should he do? He wants to go see Gandhi. Because he's really interested in this peace ethic of like nonviolence. But he takes a job in England because things are starting to heat up with the Nazis and things are getting uncomfortable. And Bonhoeffer's family is kind of known to not be huge fans of Hitler because they're very old school German. Like they're like, who's this newfangled Hitler guy? We don't like him, because he's very like breaking with tradition. He's like, this is the new Germany, right? So,
and has World War II started yet or no?
No, not yet. And so this is in the 30s. As the tension rises, he goes to London for a year. He pastors a German-speaking congregation. Already, dissidents, communists, Jews, Jewish Christians are starting to get out of Germany because they kind of see the writing on the wall in, like, let's say 1933, 1934. And he's pastoring in London, and he has a choice whether to go see Gandhi. He wrote Gandhi, got a letter back. Gandhi was like, hey, come hang out with me. And he had to choose whether to do that or to go back into Germany, because the church split. It's called the Kirchenkampf, which is the church struggle had happened, where the confessing church, which was basically like non-Hitler, non-Nazi, non-Aryan, they kind of had to go underground. And so he was commissioned. He was asked if he would run a seminary, an illegal underground seminary, to train pastors who were not official. And he chose that.
Who would have commissioned him to do that?
The confessing church, which was like they broke off of what became known as the Deutsche Christen, the German Christians, like kind of nationalist, pro-Hitler. So they kind of were organizing these quiet ways of continuing to train pastors, equip them, and quietly plant churches and stuff like that. So this is all illegal, not on the up and up with the state. So he goes to a place called Finkenwalde and does that for 2 years. He trains pastors. He makes friends. They start a community called the House of the Brethren, House of the Brothers. That gets shut down by the Gestapo in 1937. Mm-hmm. He starts going underground. He becomes like a double agent spy guy. Very interesting story. There's been some okay movies made about it. There still needs, like, the big, great Bonhoeffer movie still has not been made. And I know a lot of people in Hollywood that would like to make it, but nobody can agree on how to do it. So that's how Hollywood tends to work. But he becomes a double agent. He's feeding information as World War II starts. He's feeding information to the British through his ecumenical church contacts, like in different countries and stuff like that.
So he's become a double agent at this point. He's become essentially a spy for the Allies.
Basically, he's still a German, but he's feeding information to the Allies.
Just because he felt like
he was able to get a
more
job
on the right side of history.
Yeah, he knew Hitler was wrong, and he knew Germany was wrong, and he knew bad things were happening. And he had stood up publicly, and then everyone was like, "You should probably stop that." So he went underground with that.
I see.
So he was part of the conspiracy that tried to assassinate Hitler. Let me be clear: Bonhoeffer did not personally try to kill Adolf Hitler. That's a straw man that people. There's a big argument of whether he affirmed the assassination attempt on Hitler. I'm on the side that says, yes, he did. There's another side of scholars that say, no, he didn't. It's a big mess. But I'm not saying he tried to kill Hitler. What I'm saying is he was part of the circle of people who conspired to try to blow up a room that Hitler was going to be in, and it failed. Like the whole Valkyrie plot was an offshoot of that conspiracy circle. So anyway, so he's a double agent kind of guy. He's still writing letters, and he gets an opportunity to go back to the United States. I skipped that part. He gets an opportunity to go back to the United States right before the war is breaking out, like 1938, like 1939. And he goes back to the United States, and he hates it. And he's like, I'm in the wrong place. This is not what God wants. And this is when you had to get on a boat. Like, this is not like just get on a plane, right? He had to get on a boat. So he gets on a boat. He comes across. He's in New York. They're hooking him up with a job. He has contacts. He has people that are going to, like, he's going to be safe. He's going to be able to ride out the war. And later, the apartment he was staying in New York, they found the entire floor was covered in cigarette butts. He was just chain smoking. He just was a wreck. And he almost immediately decided, I have to go back. And he gets on literally the last boat back to Germany that you could take from New York back to Germany before the war breaks out. Goes back, decides to suffer with his people, decides to support his people, do the double agent thing, be part of the conspiracy. Eventually gets arrested before he could finish his magnum opus, which is called Ethics, which is what I wrote my dissertation about, his book Ethics. He gets put in a Nazi prison for a couple of years. He's writing letters. They become known as letters and papers from prison, which influence people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu in their fight against apartheid in South Africa, like the whole Nelson Mandela and all that.
Who's he writing these letters to?
His family, his friends, other pastors, because he has so many students that were part of, like, he had taught, encouraging people a lot to his family and friends and to his...
Not so much world leaders.
No, just people he knows. Okay. And because he has to have them smuggled out.
Mm.
He has to have, like, a deal with the guards and all that. So as things are wrapping up, Hitler learns of the plot against his life, and he discovers that a lot of Bonhoeffer's family and friends are involved, and... towards the very end of the war, as Hitler knows he's losing because the Russians are, like, breathing down the east side of Berlin's neck, so to speak, Hitler wants everyone to be dead who had conspired against him, because he knows he doesn't have long to do that, and he's Hitler, so he wants to take everybody out. So Bonhoeffer was transferred to a concentration camp at Flossenburg, and shortly after Easter... he preached an Easter sermon for himself and some of the other prisoners that were there, and then they hung him by piano wire, and so he died 2 weeks before the concentration camp was liberated by the Russians.
Whoa!
So that's one of the reasons people care about his story, because it's pretty riveting. And he totally lived. And the guy who was with him was a British captain who said, "I've never seen someone go to their death more peacefully."